There's this huge gap across all industries where people just aren't taught how to be people managers. I never had any people management training. And then there I was, all of a sudden I was a people manager and I had to learn how to manage people. Engagement and motivation of team members is so important that it costs thousands, it costs millions across industries where people are just not being managed properly.
Do you think from the organisations that you get to see that culture is encouraged?
It's one of those things where you
Miles Bonell is a fractional HR consultant at Milo and fractional head of people and culture at Carpentry Architecture and Traffic Label Limited. With over 15 years in HR and talent acquisition, he supports growing businesses with practical, cost-effective people strategies.
The first thing I do when I go into a business is I will audit the business. A big chunk of that process is actually doing some kind of feedback survey to understand where the business is from a well-being perspective. Just having that is enough to start from.
How much are people recruited for their people management skills as opposed to their technical knowledge?
I had to make a strategy to
Hi Miles, welcome to The Power Between.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Good to be on the podcast.
It's great to speak with you. Miles, you're an HR consultant, but you've had roles in a number of different organizations, some of them pretty substantial, the likes of Tesco and Amazon, both of whom have obviously enormous numbers of staff and employees, and will have great layers of sort of process and protocol in them. And you've also worked in and around the care home world, which brings its own challenges too. And now you're in a HR consulting business of your own. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you decided to end up out on your own rather than perhaps in one of those big businesses, and what's taken you there.
Absolutely. So yeah, I kind of stumbled into recruitment as you do, and my background kind of started off as a recruitment consultant, and I very quickly understood that I loved people. I wasn't very good at selling, which is why the recruitment consultant wasn't the right fit for me. But yeah, I mean, over the last 10 or so years, I've been through big companies, small companies, worked for, the likes of Amazon, Tesco, like you said, and much smaller organizations. So I guess the last 5 years has been the real change for me, where I've gone from quite senior positions in companies to now being in this HR consultant role. And the thing that kind of I've always been really attracted to project work. So seeing, a project from, beginning to end in that completion process, which is what the majority of my roles have been, is go in, do some kind of turnaround project work or, work towards some kind of end goal. And then that kind of just naturally led me into this consultancy position where I'm now working with a number of different companies, supporting them with their HR processes. So it might just be as simple as we don't know how to, attract, retain, and keep our people, to actually we've got some real tricky people challenges at the moment, and we don't know how to solve them. So yeah, it's just been a natural process for me going from that, employed work, which is pretty much to date most been contract work, to being in this consultant role.
I mean, looking back at those two big organizations I mentioned, Tesco and Amazon, and I think Tesco, off my head, if it's not the largest commercial employer in the UK outside of the NHS and obviously in the public sector, it's up there amongst them. And Amazon, equally on a global scale, is a massive employer. So, I mean, their approach to people has to be really structured, and there's a massive number of people managers in the middle of them. And you were on the recruitment talent side when you were working for those organizations, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Tesco was actually towards the beginning of my career, and I was brought in to centralize the recruitment team to create a shared service model. But yeah, it was for me personally, I was kind of leading that project with a couple of the senior leaders in the business, but it would be typically working with and recruiting the middle management kind of profile for the business in their head office. My team exclusively looked after the head office population. And then, yeah, Amazon was, yeah, again, it's pretty much all middle management. So Amazon's a funny business where you think of the leaders in the business. It's so big, and you just can't wrap your head around how big it is. So what you think are senior leaders in the UK are not, and what you would qualify as, being an extremely experienced, individual that's leading UK teams, they don't actually really make all the decisions. Are over in America, and they're levels above. So yeah, so typically anyone that's not based out of America, as far as I've seen from my time at Amazon, are middle management. It doesn't matter how senior you are, you're still in the eyes of Amazon, you're still kind of middle management.
In terms of the fact that they're not making any strategy, they're not sort of making those bigger corporate direction type decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. Even in my role, I had to make a strategy to look after we had this massive issue across EMEA where we couldn't find specific language speaking roles for this area of the business, which was causing major issues, massive financial losses. So there had to be a strategy put in place to figure out how we were going to attract these people, how we were going to fill the roles, how we were going to actually grow that side of the business. So yeah, there's definitely micro strategies happening, and then above me there were strategies for the wider HR population, but it was never that I would consider them micro strategies where they are focused on one particular thing, but not actually making any tangible change within the business, no big decision-making strategies. But yeah, so this is Amazon is a great example of the majority of the population being middle management and having to work towards a goal which feeds into a bigger strategy, which feeds into a bigger strategy. So there's so many layers to it.
I mean, that obviously affects the culture of the organization. If you don't have an enormous amount of strategic influence, so you're therefore just on tactical, operational type decision making, what do you think how does that impact, or how was it impacting? And we're not just let's not just focus on Amazon here, but organizations you've seen across the board, how the sort of energy and purpose that people bring to their role.
Big companies and small companies, they have to operate differently. There's, I'm working for startups at the moment and everything is just go, go, go. So decision making and red tape is completely void. People want to see progress. People want to see a return on their investment on their staff. People want to see that, people that are experienced that they're bringing into the business are able to make change and make change quickly. That is the complete opposite to Amazon. So it's like, it couldn't be further from that. So you are governed by red tape. You have to, if you want to make the slightest change or suggest the slightest deviation from what's already there, you have to go through layer upon layer of approvals. So even just a suggestion to the change of an interview process has to go, you have to write a white paper, which then has to be reviewed by two senior people and someone from a different team. So it's very different, and you have to take a very different approach to both types of roles. But yeah, so it's having works for both. I mean, I think there's definitely I'm attracted to both because both have their merits. But I mean, I love working in an environment where you can make change and it's easy to make change and you're empowered to make change, which is definitely for me the smaller organizations where you have that impact.
I mean, there's no denying Amazon's success. It's
Oh yeah, yeah.
and as much as we may wish that we didn't, I'm speaking personally, we do use it all the time. So I mean, it works. It's fulfilling a function, and it's extraordinarily efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because so how they operate, to kind of give a bit more insight, is it's almost like they have you have Amazon Retail, Amazon Web Services, you have these different businesses which fall under Amazon, and then you have it's almost like you have businesses within inside businesses. So my department would have the kind of department head, and that almost operates as its own business. So you kind of move within that business, so you don't really interact that much outside of your business, which actually makes it easier, I guess, to form that culture, because you can do team away days and you can do this kind of building culture within your specific kind of business area within Amazon. But in terms of embedding culture, Amazon's actually been really clever, and they have these leadership principles they live by. And you might have heard of the "every day is day one"
Yeah.
mantra, which is embedded in you. So you want to almost move and feel like it's a startup, even though you're working for one of the world's biggest businesses. So they empower that, and they do that through these leadership principles. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there's 12 or 13 of them that cover a broad spectrum of ways of working. But that essentially sets the tone for the culture and sets the tone for how you're expected to work within your role. Side of that, your little individual business unit will then, support you with meeting other people and, working, ways of working, how things, how things are managed.
How does that every day's day one, which is a pretty much a startup scale up approach, fit then with the all changes need to be reviewed by 3 different people? That sounds like there's a bit of friction there between those.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's almost like come up with ideas, come up with change, but the ideas and the change that you're putting forward has to be game changing. It has to be some serious stuff, and you have to prove its worth.
And so how many of those ideas that are coming up with get through the process?
A few do. It just takes a long time. That's the problem. And that's the difference. So they want the ideas, they want the change, they want to be better, which is great. But you have to, really put your effort into it, and you have to really kind of push through those barriers to make that change. And I made some changes whilst I was there, so I'm living proof that actually you can
It
make
can
change.
happen.
But it's just a lot harder. But yeah, I mean, they have program teams that will. It's not like I've got a really cool idea. We can change our reporting processes so that we automate it more and it's more efficient. You put the idea forward, you put your paper forward, and then you'll start working with program teams that essentially are implementers of change, and they will lead a project from beginning to end. You'll be part of that, but it's almost like there's a team for everything there. Whereas where I'm working at the moment, for some of my clients, I have an idea. I say to the exec team that I'm supporting, I'm like, within HR, we need to start doing this. We need to, the example off the top of my head is we need to look at really benchmarking the salaries for people that are coming into the business against some real data rather than what we've always done, because we're flying into roles blind, and in order for us to do that, we need to invest in the data. The data is going to cost X amount. And this is the reason that for it, we will save in the long term in terms of overpayments. We'll be able to engage people and retain people if we're paying fairly. And then it's just a case of, yep, that's a fair point, Miles, go and do it. That's how quick the change works in startups.
I mean, I can see that if you're a middle manager I'm using Amazon there generically, in a big organization, you're wading through deeper, stickier waters than you clearly are in the startup, and that's tiring and exhausting, and you sort of can lose your motivation presumably for doing that. You go, if everything happens more slowly. But on the flip side, in that role you've just described, the current one, you come up with an idea and they go, yeah, that's great, go on and do it. Then there's a weight there too, that you've got to do it yourself, and there's less of a team, if any team, to support you to implement it. So I mean, but both, I suppose, come with challenges.
No, absolutely. So I guess I know we've used Amazon a lot in this, but everyone knows it. Everyone can probably relate. But it's the good thing about using Amazon as compared to a startup is it's complete opposites of the spectrum here. But I think you need to manage as a middle manager. You kind of need to manage your own expectations as to what each of the roles going to give. So if you go into a role like Amazon, you're going to be fully supported. You're going to have e-learning. You'll have to update your e-learning once a year, and you'll have to make sure that you'll have kind of KPIs. I'm sure that you'll work towards objectives. Everything's going to be there. So you're going to have such a fully structured role. You're going to be so fully supported, and you're going to be you're going to have quite a specific task that you'll end up focusing on. You're not going to be a generalist. You're going to be an expert. You're going to be a subject matter expert in what you're doing, whether that is being a manager and just managing people, whether it's a subject matter expert in a specific topic, but everything is going to be very niche on what you're focusing on in that large organization. And then you flip to kind of managing your own expectations in a startup or a smaller company. You're right. It is all about, you have to motivate yourself. You have to come up with the ideas, but if you come up with that idea, you're managing that project from end to end. You're owning it, and all eyes are on you. There's no, oh, my team, X person in my team hasn't come back to me in a week or so. You came up with this idea a week ago. How are we doing in it? When can we get it executed? And it's the time frames are unrealistically, close. There's no, and then that I guess there's a sliding scale there as well in terms of the size of organization and how that will differ from, the Amazons to startups. And as you go up in size of organization, you'll have teams that will start to, support you with that project change and support you with that work. And, you'll have the more established onboarding process and training and everything. So yeah, it's quite, yeah. You've definitely got to manage your own expectations when you enter into the business based on its size.
I mean, in terms of recruiting for these organizations, how much of it? I mean, you said that in Amazon, you're being recruited for your expertise or expected to have deep expertise. How much are people recruited for their people management skills as opposed to their technical knowledge or experience?
So at Amazon, you are specifically identified as a people manager or an individual contributor. So if you are recruited as a people manager, you would have to have experience having managed people. So you would be grilled and tested against varying criteria based on your leadership skills. So this all comes back to those leadership principles I was talking about with Amazon, where they use them in their interview process to identify the best caliber of candidates, and one of those would be leadership, critical thinking, and how you manage people, how you engage people. You won't have that in most other organizations. So yeah, so to answer your question, you are very clearly identified as a people manager before you are interviewed at Amazon. So they will only recruit people that have managed people into those types of roles.
And that works, do you think? I mean, do you see the benefits of that?
Yes and no. From my perspective, based on my own experience here, and this can be quite a nice meaty topic for us to get into. There's a clear gap, I believe, in how experience of people management is actually gained within roles. So I know for myself, I never had any people management training. I got to a point where it was like, Mark, you're doing really well in your role as an individual contributor, and your role's grown. Let's hire you a recruitment advisor, a couple of recruitment advisors. And then there I was, all of a sudden, I was a people manager, and I had to learn how to manage people. So I never had that training, and I don't think most people do. So it's one of those things where it's all of a sudden you're doing a good job, and then you're now managing people, and it's funny because I work in there's a few of my clients that are in the tech sector at the moment, and a lot of the people that I'm working with, they're really good at their jobs, but they've got no people skills, and they don't want to be people managers. It's one of those things where there's some people that are just born for it. They're great with people, and they're good at coaching. They're good at getting the best out of teams, and other people just don't have that natural ability to really engage people, and they might not want to, but they're just born into this people management role. Then all of a sudden we're expecting them to level up the team members that are coming in and coach and mentor and do all the things, but they're never taught how to do that. There's this massive gap. So for me, there's this huge gap in across all industries where people just aren't taught how to be people managers. And then even if the likes of Amazon, for example, like we just talked about, are hired as a people manager, it doesn't necessarily mean that because they've managed 10 to 20 people, they're good
They're good
leaders.
at it.
It doesn't. And I mean, I give you an example. There's one person that I was working with. I'm not going to name names, obviously, but they were really good at what they did. They were really good at keeping to KPIs, and they hit targets every month. They were part of a sales team, and I just kept getting feedback that they were terrible to work for. They weren't having one-to-ones with their team members. They were just emailing them saying, "Why are you not hitting your KPIs?" There was no kind of mentorship. There was no coaching. They weren't inspiring people. They were just all about hitting KPIs, and there was no, whilst, they were hitting the targets that they were met, there's no bringing the team along with them, and there was no engagement. So we had such high turnover, which was, whilst they were hitting these KPIs, the impact of turnover from a cost perspective was almost, it was neutralizing that. So, and I think a lot of companies don't realize this, that actually engagement and motivation of team members is so important that it costs thousands, it costs millions across industries where people are just, they're not being managed properly. And I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if you've got any, had any conversations about that. But for me, it's just it's a massive gap.
Well, I mean, I think that to a large extent, that's exactly what this podcast needs to be about shining a light on the fact that we do need to focus attention on that more. I've got the 3 L's that we as a society completely fail to give any support or tuition on, and we just expect people to be able to do well. Learning, we're never taught how to learn. We go to school and we learn, but we're never taught what we need to do in order to learn. And there's some clear understanding, quite a lot of it doesn't fit with the modern educational system. But just sitting in a classroom with someone speaking at you is insufficient to do learning. And so that's one. Loving is the other one. We don't, in terms of how to create and maintain relationships, is just something that we're expected to understand and do as we go into our teenage years and then beyond. And the third one, obviously for me, is leadership. And you get to a point where you need to lead, and you're just left to go and do it. And this is leadership in terms of people management rather than high level strategic leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's a real weakness in society and our organizations around failing to support people to do that. And if we can try and find a way to, let's focus on learning and leadership. I'll leave the loving to someone else, but because the learning and leadership are connected, clearly, I think we'd see immediate benefits.
So I was talking to, funny, you talk about the learning part. I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and he's got 3 children. They're in kind of higher education. One's, don't know how it's worked out this way. One's GCSEs, one's their levels, one's university. And we're talking about, the process of going through that and how the difficulties of each of them. And actually, one of his children, he was saying that is really challenges with learning the UK education system and how it expects people to learn. And I've always been interested in learning. I love learning. I will listen to podcasts, and I soak in the information that I think is relevant, and I can dissect it in my head. But this sit down in a classroom, you must remember everything that we tell you out of this book and then memorize it to sit down in a classroom and then regurgitate, does not work for me. I rebelled against that whole process. It was something that I had this, it was almost like this deep rooted passion to hate throughout my childhood and rebel against. It just wasn't for me. And it's the same. There was this study where, but I'm sure a number of studies, but it's around 20% of the population do not and cannot learn like that. And we're not allowing that, not only in the UK education system, but when we go on to, become employees and work and get jobs, we're not allowing that extra, that process of learning for that extra 20% of the population that doesn't learn from classroom,
Well, I suspect it's a lot more than 20%, but there's probably 20% who really don't fit that. And then there's probably another 50% taking it up to 70%. get bits of it and do bits of it because it's required, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, it's not, and I speak for myself here, and hopefully some of the listeners might be able to relate, but I learn from doing something. If you tell me, if you started giving me a lecture on how my TV works, I will not remember half the things that you said to me in terms of which buttons do what. I have to pick that remote up. I have to find out what works and how it works. I've got to physically, do it. And I haven't seen really that type of learning given to people. Most of it at the moment I'm finding is e-learning. You go on there, you do a, quick quiz, and then that tells you your percentage of how much you've learned from what they've told you in a presentation. Or you might actually be better, fortunate enough to go to some kind of in-person learning, and then someone will stand up and tell you everything about a topic, and then you have to remember those bits, and then, you might have some kind of interactive thing, but I've got to be doing it. I've got to
Yeah, no,
actually.
I mean, I don't think you're unusual at all in that. I mean, I always like to refer to the Ebbinghaus who created his forgetting curve, which is, how soon after you walk out of the lecture or reading a book or whatever it is that you start forgetting. So immediately at the end of the lecture, you've probably got somewhere around about 70% of it sort of sitting in your head. But 2 hours later, it's already down to under 50%. And 2 days later, it's down to about 5%. And, we learn by repetition. And certainly the actively doing part is that too. And so it's little and often, because that's how human beings learn. We learnt where the berries were on the tree, or on which trees, because we walked past them 3 times a day when we were hunter gatherers or whatever it was. And we were hunter gatherers for whatever, 300,000 years before we sort of started moving into agrarian and industrial. And that's where we evolved. And that's still largely how we learn. And there are some people who can sit down and read a book and remember it and regurgitate it and use it really valuably, but most of us can't. And I think we need, when we're training people in organizations, we tend to think, put you on a course for 2 days, and you'll come back and there we go, the box checked. The one that always really terrifies me is I'm in my late 50s. In my adult years, I've been on first aid courses twice, but present me with someone who's fallen down in front of me now. And last time I went on a first aid course was 12 years ago, something like that. I haven't a clue what to do really, and I'm probably more dangerous than had I not been on one at all, because I sort of
Yeah,
half know about
it's
things.
funny you say that. So my wife, if she ever listens to this, will probably kill me. But my wife is a teacher. She's incredible at her job. She's an, inspiring teacher. She's really creative with her approach, and she's a fantastic mother. But when it comes to emergency situations, she panics. She does it every year. She does the first aid course. She has to learn and what to do. She just panics, and I'm the one there that's like, right, we need to do this, 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 and this. I'm the one that's proactive because that's how my brain works. I rather than panic, I step up and I evaluate the situation. I don't lose control. But that comes back to the whole conversation. This whole piece that we've just talked about actually loops right back round to that people management piece, where you're either, you're good at it and naturally it comes to you and that's something you want to do and like to do, or it's something that, is a learned process through, that repetition. But you kind of need to want to do it to be an effective people manager. And then kind of leaping again back round to the conversation that we've just had about those learning styles. I learn through my peers, and I learn through, the leadership teams that I'm working with, and, other teams I'm working with when I'm actually doing the job, which is why it's so important to have really good people managers that have been upskilled and taught best practice. Because for those people, for that 20%, or it's probably more like you said, that don't learn through that e-learning, that, the
We learn
scripted.
by observation, yeah, and
Exactly. You learn from your managers, and I hope that the people that have reported to me in the past will speak highly of the fact that I've tried to upskill them. I've delivered feedback to them that has been constructive in a way that's gonna, level them up. But not all managers will do that. I mean, when I'm looking for a job, I think the first thing that I look at is, well, it's obviously the business I'm going into, and, what the security of the role, and whether the role is gonna interest me. But I take a real look at who I'm going to be reporting into and who my people manager is, because I've been in roles where on paper it looks fantastic. It's been my dream job, and I've got there, and then the person I'm reporting to just it
That's a
doesn't
nightmare.
marry up with the expectation. So
Well, which is, I'm presuming you went into those roles eyes wide open, thinking that you'd done the assessment, but I mean, we can get those assessments wrong, and that's what happens. Dealing with people is filled with uncertainty and unpredictability. But I think the thing about the leadership part and the training and the necessity for the training to happen on a regular basis, not massively, but just little dollops of it throughout your working year, is you can then do it intentionally. So when you to go back to the first aid analysis, when you step up, if there's a crisis, that there you're calm and you're creating the environment for it. But do you actually know that what you're doing is the correct thing to do? And if you did know that, then you'd be more confident in what you were doing.
oh no, I'm absolutely confident. I haven't got a clue what I'm doing, but I'm very confident. It's just, I'm not going to bring the mood down on the podcast, but there was an incident at home where one of our children was critically ill. A period of time, my wife panicked, didn't have a clue what to do. I ran up the stairs and I managed the situation, but I relied on my wife, who was panicking, to tell me what to do because she did know.
Because she did know, right? Okay, so you had the information coming in.
The information was there. I just need to, I
Well,
needed
that's
to
a
get it
perfect
out.
team.
But
Perfect
but
team.
yeah, exactly, and that's why me and her work very well together. But again, the reason I give this particular example is because that's what you should do at work. You should go in there and surround yourself with absolute superstars and learn from them. And people are so scared of giving feedback and receiving feedback that they perceive it as a negative, and it shouldn't be. It should be one of the most richest forms of learning you can have is failing, and then understanding what went wrong. Why did you fail? What's gone wrong in that situation? What you need to do better the next time, and then you there you go. Hey presto, you've just learned something very valuable that you're not going to forget anytime soon. And then, you just need someone to help you articulate that, help you get to the position. Well, firstly, identify that you have failed in an area, give that feedback that you failed, and then tell you what you need to do better to improve yourself. Because if you don't receive that feedback, if you don't, have someone that's going to be able to support you with leveling up and learning like that, you'll just be in your role, failing time and time again, and treading water.
And do you think from the organizations that you get to see that culture is encouraged, actively encouraged? I mean, it's going to be different, obviously, from organization to organization. But I mean, have you seen? Put it another way. Have there been organizations that do it really well, and what are they doing differently to the ones who don't do it well?
It's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of the smaller companies that I've gone into that maybe had a small HR team or no HR team at all have never, done an annual review. They didn't know that that was the thing. They didn't know that there are processes out there that enable feedback to be delivered. And the same goes to one-to-one. They don't know that, having a monthly one-to-one with your team just to understand, what's going on at the moment, and then being able to identify crisis and preempt any, longer term issues. A lot of companies that I go into don't even have those processes in place, but you take a step back and then ask the question, why would they have it in place if they don't have someone telling them that is the normal, that should be happening, but also educating them on why that should be happening. And, there for HR in general, I mean, there's this misrepresentation of what we do and who we are, and what we're trying to achieve in the business. I've got one client that refers to me as fluffy HR, where I go in and try and put my arms around people and protect them, but there is a reason for that, and I'm definitely not fluffy HR. But there is a reason for that, and that is this: in order to get the best out of people, there has to, and this is going to sound so lame, but there has to be that second L. There's got to be that love for people where you are, you know, bringing everyone together and you are creating teams through creating a positive learning environment through two-way feedback and
People have to feel cared for to exist.
absolutely. But again, there's no way you're gonna feel cared for if someone isn't giving you honesty and telling you when you're doing things wrong, but also celebrating things when they go right. And you need that love to be sandwiched between the learning and the leadership to make sure that all three of them are working in this circle of it's one of those things where you need all three for it to work. You can't live without one of them. If you don't have that two-way correspondence between the leadership and the learning piece, all you're gonna have is someone that's going to a job for the sake of doing their job, and it's just gonna be a transaction. And then something that's happened over the last 10 years, which is it's probably the use of social media, which is this is stemmed from, is people don't like calling work families. It's like your work is a job, you're just a number, you're not a family at work. And I agree with it. But you've got to enjoy going to work. You can't rebel against work because it's not something that you want to do. You spend the majority of your life working. You need something that's gonna be a really good culture, make you the best you. And yeah, there's gotta be that culture embedded in teams where, you have all those three pieces, the learning, love, the leadership. So it's yeah, they all come hand in hand.
The question or the challenge is, I suppose, how one nurtures that in the process of actually doing your work as well, in an organization. And a large part of it is culture setting, and a large part of it is role modeling. But there are definitely skills around giving feedback, and understanding when to do it and what modes to do it in. So, but again, if we just go on a 2-day course and that was 5 years ago, then it's going to have lost some of its impact. So again, it's that little and often.
Yeah, you need to hire an expert. You need to hire someone that knows what they're doing to implement it so people can do it. So the reason I guess we're using this as an example right now. I'm literally going through the process as most people are doing everyone's annual reviews. So there's one company I'm currently working at. They've never done annual reviews before. It's a nearly 20-year-old company have gone through 20 years of operating without, giving structured feedback processes. It's mad. It's crazy.
What sort of numbers of people?
Less than 100, so it's between
All right.
50 and
But
100,
still,
but it's
still
still
yeah.
substantial. Yeah, yeah. But they haven't been given e-learning. They haven't had to do the sit-down course. What's happened is that a process has been mapped out, a simple one to start with, which enables everyone to do their own reviews and reflect, and for managers to do a simple review of the individual with some very structured questions, which helps get the best answers out of them. But then just a few kind of one-to-one meetings with managers to tell them how to run a relaxed, informal feedback session to go through how they performed over the last year and, create some loose objectives for the coming year to people to work towards. Just having that is enough. It's enough to start from to then start putting something more structured in place for the coming years. So I think, going gung ho and creating this large convoluted process, which makes things overly complicated. I think it's way too much in this specific example, but just starting them off with something small so that they can learn from this experience. Because this isn't going to go 100% right. There's going to be people that will probably get upset because maybe feedback's been given a bit too harshly, that maybe managers have done it wrong. So the best way is just to guide them, show them what good looks like. I've demonstrated a mock feedback session, giving the sandwich of truth to individuals. I'm going to call it that because I can't give it a proper name.
Yes, well, we know.
But yeah, just showing people how to deliver feedback in a constructive way so that it can be taken on board as a learning as opposed to an insult on one's ability to do their job. So yeah, I think sometimes people think too much about it. And coming back to the original question and actually what we were talking about, people need to learn from example. People need to see things in action to show it's happening. So I showed them as what good looks like. The senior managers can then do their reviews, and then the middle managers can then do their reviews, and then all of a sudden we've got this learning process all started off, kicked off with a business, which can then be learnt from for next year when they do their annual reviews next year, which will be most probably more in depth. It will most probably be linked to their salary uplift. It will most probably have some kind of peer review in there as well. So it's not just your managers doing it.
Yeah.
You're right. It all comes from learning from other people, having that, doing it yourself, just starting it so that you can start that learning process.
Part with all of these things is to take the first initial steps, isn't it?
Yeah.
And get
Yeah.
start down the path, and don't overstretch it to begin with, because then you'll trip yourself up. But and so much of these processes and initiatives are just little things we can do differently, and I think that's the message that we need to be putting out there, is that it doesn't take that wholesale transformation in order to get the process to start moving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it comes up time and again, this issue around feedback and giving people the opportunity to practice it and understand it, and also see what it's like to be on the other side of it, which I think is a complex skill to be able. You may think you've couched something in terribly sort of soft or well phrased terms, and in fact it's received completely differently.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those things, and it's such a some people receive feedback very well, and some people don't. So you've got to obviously tailor it for that. But just kind of coming back to this feedback piece, I mean, it's the first thing I do when I go into a business. Any business that I work with that I've never worked with before is I will audit the business, and part of that audit of the business will be just kind of looking at processes, looking at how they do things, looking at kind of quick wins. But a big chunk of that process is actually doing some kind of feedback survey to understand where the business is from a well-being perspective, from a culture perspective, to how people, are people happy in their jobs? Is and getting all of that feedback. I know it's not personal to me because it's not me that's created that, but just getting that feedback from all of the employees, probably one of the most critical pieces of information that I can get as someone in HR to then develop some kind of strategy to build around. And then once I have that feedback, I can then deliver that feedback to the managers in a way so that I can say, look, this is the data, this is what it's showing us, this is what's happening in your business currently, and this is what we've got to do about it. So feedback is a gift, and the more that we can embed that in businesses, big and small, the better we'll be able to work. I think across all industries, across the entire population.
Absolutely. No, well, I think it's a critical takeaway. There were all sorts of other things I wanted to discuss with you too. We talked previously about the impact of COVID and how that's affect management challenges, and now the impact that AI is bringing on. But I think we're out of time, so maybe we need to do this again later on and pick up on those. But Miles, Bonell, thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me on the podcast.